Hi everyone, this is Zadrian Smith for PETRIe Spotlight TV. And today I am so excited. Joining me is one of my favorite people, my fellow Capricorn, Ali Maki, coming in from Los Angeles. Ali!
Hello, Z! Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor. My Capricorn friend for life.
Capricorn friend. I mean, getting to this point was like planning. I don't know, like,
if you're a Capricorn, you know we are planning on lock. We're getting things ready to go.
Changed outfits. This was not our original look. So just so y'all know, this is option 2. So we had to change outfits. We had to get the
styled me
right.
thing.
So Ali, no, I am so, for those of you who don't know, Ali and I also work in the capacity. I work with her as her fashion director, kind of curating her style for red carpets, for press tours, and we met when she was promoting Toy Story 4, and it's just been beyond the professional. It's just been just the most amazing friendship. I mean, I can speak for my end. Ali might hate me. It's just been the most it's been the most amazing friendship, and we kind of just developed this bond where I think we've both had moments where we've kind of felt lost, and we've kind of felt like, well, what's next? And we've been able to have really, really candid conversations. And Ali, I don't know if you remember this conversation, but last year we were in New York for the Dior Guggenheim event, and we just kind of all sat there. It was me, you, Eric, and Mariko, and we started talking about what we wanted, what would subsequently be this year, what we wanted this year to be. And wow, what a year this has been.
I mean, wow. But I do feel like that conversation kind of really was kind of a precursor to what's happening, because I was so in my head, because I felt like, all that was happening was such a dream come true. It was all these things that I dreamed about for years and years. I mean, you and we were going to this Vogue party, and, that's something just like completely, I never thought I would even ever be invited to. And I feel like that in itself can be an overwhelming feeling, because once you are at those tables, you're like, oh my gosh, do I fit in? Where do I fit in? So I feel like you were really able to slow me down and be like, let's just sit here and let's just be grateful. And you really reminded me in that moment, like, be grateful, take some time to yourself. And you reminded me, like, you asked me, you're like, Ali, have you ever taken time to just be alone with your thoughts? And I really took that to heart, Z, because it was like in all my time, I moved here when I was 14. I'd never taken a second to actually breathe by myself and ask, what does Ali want, outside from all the kind of societal expectations of just the pressure I put on myself. So I'll always take that lesson with me.
I wanted to start our interview by just asking you, okay, so you are 4th generation Japanese American. I want us to talk you through your family's lineage and your family's journey into coming to America from Japan, because I think what you revealed to me when we spoke was very, it immediately helped me understand who you are.
Like you said, I'm a 4th generation Japanese American, which is actually called Yonsei. So that's kind of what I identify as a Yonsei Japanese American. And yeah, my family has been here for a long time. I mean, when we talk about 4 generations, that's a very, very long time. So my grandmother, she was actually 16 years old when she was sent to the internment camps. So during this time, right around World War II, there was a huge distress that was created around Japanese Americans that were living on the West Coast. So over 100,000 Japanese Americans that lived on the coast were sent to these 10 different internment camps throughout the country, and she was one of them. She came from an extremely poor family because of the Alien Land Law Act. Asians weren't actually allowed to own land. So her father was, he came to the States from Japan, and he ended up being a sharecropper because they couldn't own their own land. So they did the incredibly backbreaking work of, picking the strawberries, being like totally hunched over in the sun for hours and hours at a time. And so she was a total farmer's daughter for years and years. And they finally worked so hard long enough to where their oldest son could could own the farm under his name because he was born here. So they ended up saving up, finally bought this little tiny farm. They were so excited, so proud of it. 2 months later, basically the war hit and they lost everything, along with over 100,000 Japanese American people. And they were immediately sent to the Santa Anita racetracks, which is right around LA. And that's kind of where they were held. And then from there, they were kind of sent to 10 different centers.
Let's pause, because let's put that into context.
Yeah.
I think when you were telling me this story, it was because I think there's been such a gap, you know, this is just like you said, it's 1942. So these are people who they were not criminals. They were U.S. citizens, law-abiding U.S. citizens.
Totally American, yep.
Totally American, had worked hard to own the land. And because of what happened with Pearl Harbor and the aftermath of that, as you said, they were immediately rounded up and taken, 100,000 Japanese Americans were rounded up and taken to a racetrack.
Yeah, which is essentially, they were placed in horse stalls and kept there. And then, you know, once they were sent to, so the camp that my grandmother was sent to was called Heart Mountain. And it's in the middle of Wyoming, like a completely desolate, like you could just see like, you know, stark brown land for miles. But what's kind of crazy about this one center was right in the middle of nowhere, there was this mountain that was shaped like a heart, like in the middle of nowhere. And that's where this kind of camp was placed. And a lot of like articles say that it was almost scientifically impossible that this mountain could have existed in the middle of nowhere, because it almost looked like it was a heart that was like turned on its side in a sense. And I always think that's significant because, you know, here in the middle of nowhere are these people. And, you know, I love the resilience and strength of Japanese Americans, because while they were sent there, they still were able to like find this community. It's so beautiful, Z. Like they had like baseball teams and women's club, and there was so much activism happening within the camps. I mean, Heart Mountain was one of the main centers where so much activism was happening, and a lot of it coming from women. You know, they had Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and the most beautiful thing is, so my grandfather, he was living, he went to University of Washington, so he was on the West Coast. But at that time, like around that time, there was a lot of, you know, discrimination happening. So he actually knew that if he stayed there, he would have to go to the camps as well. So he went back to his hometown of Montana. And because that wasn't on the West Coast, he didn't have to be interned. But because the camp was close by, their family went to go visit the camps just to kind of see how they could help. And that's how my grandparents met, is he went to go visit the camps. Your
grandparents met in the camp?
In the camps.
Wow.
And she was interned and he was not. And he ended up later getting drafted into the 442nd unit, which is another
very
layer.
Ironic, because I think it's very interesting, because when I researched this a little bit further, first you take the Japanese Americans, you put them in Heart Mountain or wherever, so 100,000 people spread out into these internment camps, which were basically like, you know, they were basically like little small communities where they just wanted to, because the way the American government justified it is they said they feared for Japanese Americans' lives, and they also feared for Americans' lives. So that's why they needed to cluster them all together and make sure that they can all be accounted for together. But now, when it was time for another war to happen or time to go back to war, they drafted them right back into the war. And a lot of Japanese Americans rebelled against this.
Absolutely. I mean, there was two different ways they could kind of look at it. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to serve my country and that's just what I'm going to do it. But there was a lot of resistors that felt a very different way. Like, why should we do this when our own people are being incarcerated right now? So yeah, it created a huge division. But so my grandfather was in fact drafted into the 442nd. He was a medic, so he was sent to Italy. All the while his girlfriend was still in the camps. So
they were in the camps for 1942 to 45, so 3 years.
Yeah, about 2 to 3 years total, as a whole. Yeah, for sure. And when they left, they were left with $25 and a bus ticket, and that was it. And everything that they formerly had, everything that they had formerly had had already been sold off or, you know, given away, or it was just gone.
What kind of
So
impact do you think that would have on a people, on a culture? What kind of trauma, emotional, psychological trauma, you think that would have? Obviously, you can't speak for them because but
yeah,
if putting yourself in that position, how do you think that would have impacted a person?
there is kind of this, they call it like the Nisei code of silence. So around that time, like my grandmother, I would always ask her, like, tell me stories about it, and it would always be the same kind of resilient strength. And you and I talked about gaman, which is kind of a word specific to Japanese, and that it's like kind of endure the hardest with kind of grace and a resilience and strength. And that's kind of how I think they looked at it. It was like whatever that they had, I was like, tell me about it. Like, this is crazy that this happened. And she'd always just be like, it was what it was. And they felt she was always very positive about it. And she just kind of held it with this very positive, resilient strength, which I do think is beautiful. But at the same time, I feel like it's on my generation and those younger than me to continue to tell their story.
Obviously, there's been a lot of press around the Black Lives Matter movement. And
Yeah.
I think there's so many parallels because, and we've spoken about this in the Black community, there is this sense of don't talk about your struggle. The struggle becomes a personal thing. But
Mm-hmm.
as someone who's been a product of unpicking trauma, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's so important that we have a dialogue and we have a conversation because I was watching this really interesting a really interesting lecture about post-traumatic slave trauma. And one of the things she said is she says that if we don't unpick trauma, if we don't discuss it, if we don't have a dialogue about it, what happens is that subconsciously you pass that on to the next generation. And I want to go back to
Right.
what you said at the beginning of this interview when you said, when we were going to a dinner or a Vogue dinner, you were like, well, do I fit in here? Do I not fit in here?
Yeah.
And what
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
sometimes realize is that, of course, you're thinking that because what might I'm not obviously I'm not a psychologist, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying, those little small things make you think, well,
Mm-hmm.
why does Allie think that? What is that connected to? And that's why I said when you told me this story, I was like, huh, is there something
Yeah.
there? Is there a connecting dot there? Because
Right.
obviously people are 3 years in an internment camp in captivity basically, and now you're released
Mm-hmm.
$55 in the bus ticket and nothing else. How do you fit back into a culture that's ostracized you and just it's a lot. That really
It,
hit me. That really hit me.
right before I met you, I was in this place of like just really not understanding the power of my voice. I think there's so much shame that comes along, just that's so deeply rooted because of, I think, like you said, the trauma of my family and what we went through, that for me, speaking out was incredibly hard. And it's funny because a lot of people are like, oh, you're so outspoken. Like, how do you do that? And I want to be like, it is so hard for me. It is like my Everest to ever speak out. And I grew up in a time here, like I moved here when I was 14. I grew up in a time when there was like zero representation. So I felt that like silencing just deep within my bones. And I think, like you said, there is some sort of generational trauma of like, okay, if you speak out, like, look what happened to my own family. Like, this is what could happen. And so that's what I think is so beautiful about what's happening right now is that we have to be able to speak out. We have to be able to tell our stories and not be afraid. It's the only way that there's going to be change. And that's what I love about you and I is we were able to connect on that on such
Right.
a deep level.
I mean, do you feel empowered now with everything that's happening now to speak out more? How has this movement impacted you?
I think there's an incredible parallel within our communities. I think Japanese Americans have always felt this incredible passion to speak out and be in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I feel that so deep because I know what it was like, just a little tiny fringe of fraction of what, obviously I can't compare the struggles. I can only kind of find the parallel within them. But, during that time, the fear that was circulating around our people. I mean, I'll send you these, the propaganda images that they were spreading. It was like these cartoons that were depicting Japanese people as evil rats, and that's like a huge thing of dehumanizing tactics. And the more that was spread, it's just created this fear around the people. So that's how it was that easy to be like, fine, send them all away. So I think right now it's so important that we humanize everyone, and especially the Black community, and we have to stand behind them, you know. And I'm such a huge advocate of Asian Americans. Step up. We gotta, you know, speak up and use our voices and really be true allies for the Black community right now.